Okay, we're ready? Yes, so today, first session, I'm going to go through with you my understanding on markets and risks. So first, some background on myself. For those of you, it's our first time meeting today. So I came from risk management consulting. So these are my clients. So I work with these banks, essentially help them set up risk management processes after the crash. So now we see increasing regulations, and we see, especially now with Brexit, so we see a lot of the risks start to manifest, and then this is kind of my personal background, and from which I want to go through with you kind of some of my latest kind of personal thoughts on the topic and how that affect what we're trying to do here as a group. So when I tell people I'm in risk management, usually this is in their mind what I do. So a person comes in trying to predict the future, right? Trying to do crystal ball gazing. Whereas in reality, I would say this is probably more like the case. So for those who are a bit far out, so I'll read this for you. So this is from John Kenneth Gibbers. So in his view, there are two kinds of forecasters. So those who don't know, and those who don't know they don't know. And that's extremely true in the world I live in, and also would be true in the world of property as well. So when you ask people, where are we as an economy? So what's an economic cycle? This is what people tend to imagine in their heads. So you have this idea of, first you have a growth period, and then you have a boom, you have a peak, then you decline, you start have a recession, and then you recover. So this is typical kind of mental image of the business cycle. Whereas today, for everyone here, I want you to walk away with something like this in mind. So a few features to pick up from this. One is the period of build-up, essentially true fundamental growth, can be long, and that can be quite steady. And then you have this period of takeoff. This is kind of so in the tech world, this is kind of a typical hockey stick shape you tend to get. And at this point, everybody, so the point where you start to have greed, which is we're making a lot of money, let's keep doing this, it's a working system. And then you start to have delusion, which is I'm really smart. So whatever is happening is because of me, I'm really good at this now, and I'm going to keep making more and more of this. On the top, you have this point called new paradigm. So this is where the famous words are said, this time it's different. So whatever in the past, because people know, on average, market crash every 7 to 10 years. That's a fact. You can go back hundreds of years, you see that as a fact. However, within our own lifetimes, we experience quite a few of these. You know, this time it's different. I kind of say everything we talk about here is you can extrapolate into your personal life as well. So personally, I say, when a boy meets a girl, so no, this is the one. This time it's different. It's the same concept. Now, however, the problem occurs because kind of trees don't grow to the sky. At one point, you start to have correction. So markets start to shake. So then you say, now have denial. So it's just a bump. It's a correction. So it'll come back up again. So now, all right, look, I'm right. So now we're returning to the growth path, to the this time it's different scenario. And then very quickly you have this crash. And the speed, the slope, that vertical drop, if you look at 2007, 2008, that could be a really severe drop. So in a true business cycle, you never get this. But the problem is this is what a lot of people have in their mind. But if you see this, then your instinct would say, I can get out of that, right? So I have enough speed and awareness to, if that's really how it works in real life, then actually the economic cycle should be much less fearful than they should. Because in reality, this is what happens. Because when the fire alarm sounds, everybody will rush out to the door. So you will never get an orderly adjustment. You would just get that. You get a vertical drop. At that point, it's not a question of, if I sell this, how much loss I'm making. It becomes a question of, can I sell this at all, at any price? And often that answer can be no, especially in the property business. You're talking about large unit price, extremely illiquid asset that's usually built for a single purpose, right? So if you think about that, this is where we really expose. And then the kind of the upside is, or at least for me, this is really the sweet spot of this whole curve, right? If you have the ability to be here. This is where you want to be, right? Because that's a single point to build wealth. Capital accumulation start there. So whereas if you look at the spectrum, so in Warren Buffett's words, so he would say they're the innovators. So in this case, we call it smart money. They're the imitators, so institutions who work with your smart money. And then they're the idiots, which is this group. I may not be politically correct here, but which is very true, because in the risk world, you can almost say, as a general statement, most people are wrong most of the time, right? And that's actually okay, because this is how society progresses. The key point is, as a group or as an individual, we should make sure we're not wrong at the few occasions when it really matters, because in that case, if you're wrong, then this could become a real experience. So we talk about Warren Buffett. He raised, and this has come from his business partner, Charlie Munger. So they reckon Warren Buffett sits there a day, raised between 4 to 6 hours every day. And the rest of the time, most of the majority of that time, he'll be on the phone asking questions to people who are leading in their own industries. And so the question is, okay, so who does Warren Buffett learn from? And so the person I want to introduce you today is this. So U.S. hedge fund manager, billionaire. He managed about 120 billions of alternative investment funds. So his name is Howard Marks, and he's very well known within the investment industry on his view about risk, about market cycles. So a lot of the information we go through today will come from kind of his perspective, his line of thinking.
What's his name again? Sorry?
Howard Marks. Oh, that's a good point. So the slide I'm showing you today, we're more than happy to share a copy with you. And then within so you can't see it, so within the note section of each slide, there are commentaries. So the data I'm showing you today, there are sources where that data comes from. And the names, the different concepts, it will be within that description. So Howard Marks, US hedge fund. And actually the way he kind of made his money to get himself started, essentially in high yield bonds. Anyone in the room heard about high yield bonds? Okay, so if I change the terminology, junk bonds. Anyone heard about junk bonds before? So I see some nods here. Essentially, it's the same, right? So he specializes in buying debt of businesses who are either already in default or is going into default, and he made billions on that. Okay. So that just shows you that once you are able to grasp, if you go back to our earlier concept on the business cycle, right? He does that. So this is his business. Right? So default or going to default, high yield bonds. Right? So then a lot of topics we talk about today will come from him, and then from there's a book I can reference later on as well. So in terms of presentation in general, I learned from the best. So I learned from Pauline, Alvaro, Alan. So I was told when you present to a group like this, using PowerPoint, a few things I should be avoiding. One is I should avoid slides with too many words on. Second is I should avoid slides with graphs. And thirdly, I should avoid slides with tables full of numbers. So from this point onwards, I'm going to do my best to violate every single of those principles. And it will be an adventure together. That's how we can look at this. All right. Okay. So this is I mean, I'm happy to read this out. So this is an excerpt from Howard Marks, and this is back in 1991. And just to give you some context, so Howard Marks would write these what he called memos to his investors regularly. And he got to such a point that one day he received a letter from Warren Buffett. And that letter said, Howard, I really like what you do. I like your content. If you ever write a book, I will write the cover for you. So he got an invite from Warren Buffett to write a book. And then he wrote a book because Warren Buffett invited him to write a book. So now he has a second book coming up. So just to give you the value of the content that you can, and I'd be happy to share the link of where you can find all his memos online for free. So I'll just quickly read what he's trying to say here. So he's saying, essentially, to be able to survive and profit from cycles, you need to do three things. One is you say you need to be alert on where the market is, as in, if you think about our business cycle, so you need to be aware of where we are right now around that cycle. Right? And the second point, he will say then, you need to adjust our behavior to respond to where you are. Right? So kind of awareness and taking action in response to that awareness, those are two separate things. So you know where you are, and you need to behave, you need to change your strategy, you need to plan your future, take action according to where you are within the cycle. I'll send you the slides afterwards, so don't worry too much about taking the photo down. And then the last point is, you say, we are humans, right? So we are very susceptible to herd behavior. And we're going to see some data on this later on. So be very be conscious that anytime you start to follow the herd, you need to stop, reflect. Am I making this decision, or am I taking this action because everybody else is doing this, or because there's actually a valid fundamental reason behind it? And then this goes back to the famous saying, so Mark Twain will say, whenever I'm on the side of majority, I will stop, I'll reflect, because actually, so going back to my view is, most people are wrong most of the time. Right? And that's okay, because as long as you're not wrong on the few cases when it really matters. So Howard Marks, 3 points. One is beware of where you are in the market cycle. Take action, respond to that position, and then also just prevent yourself from drifting into this herd behavior, behaving like everybody else around you. Okay. So now let's look at some real life example. How do we apply those concepts? So this is FTSE 100, so UK stock market. So usually for individuals in this room, usually personal assets, so net worth is stored in two places mainly, stock markets and some form of real estate. And it could be in your pension, but pension could be in one of those as well. So these kind of main vehicles of wealth, if you will. So if you look at the stock market, so this is taken 21st of November, and then this is kind of a 5-day change. So if you look at that, the question is, where the market is going? Is this high or is this low? Okay. Yeah. So how do you find out more about this? How do you actually make a decision on, going back to Howard Marks' first point, know where you are in the market cycle? So what information do you need to be able to make a valuable comment? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is, if you go back to the 80s, that's what it looks like. Right. And then, see, if you think about Howard Marks' point 3, about being mindful of herd behavior, you open the TV, the stock market commentator is saying, oh, the movement is up 20 points since this morning, right? And it just shows you how crazy that whole behavior is. And people watch news, right? And they're just so susceptible to her behavior, because this is a 5-day change. You can't have any meaningful information from that. If you have like a 2-hour change from watching the news, and it's kind of what insight can you take from that? Whereas if you take a step back, so to Chris' point, so if you look at the long-term horizon, then okay, so at this point, where are we in the market cycle? Are we at the low point or the high point? Okay, at the high point. Okay. So then if we think about that market cycle, quickly go back. So we're at a high point, but do we know whether are we here or here or here? What do we think? Like high, very high peak. So who thinks we're peak? Okay. We're very high. Okay. We're high. Okay. So it's about half and half between high and very high. So we think as a group here, we're somewhere between here and here. Okay. And that conclusion, that's a conclusion we will never be able to come to just by looking at this. So there are times where you need to be really, so to Howard Marks' point 1, that you step back, you take yourself out of the day, you look at history over very long periods. This is going back to the 80s. And this is actually where you say, actually, yeah, so we are somewhere either high or very high in the market cycle right now. And the key takeaway here is, at least for me, is a lot of people come to me and ask, okay, so when do you think the next crash is? Right? So that question, they're trying to predict these things. They're trying to predict the peak. But you see, for me, the problem with that approach is, you see how, if you look at, that's time, right? If you look at time, peak is like that big, right? This cycle could be a 7 to 10 year cycle. That, it could be a week, 2 days, right? So Lehman Brothers crashed, and that could be an overnight business. Citi was almost going to crash, and they were within minutes of going down. And this is Citibank. So if you ask, when is the next crash? When is the peak? Right? You are set up to be ruined. There's no question about that. Right? So nobody could, in this world will be able to tell you where this tipping point is. Literally, it's just a point. Whereas, the question you can ask here is actually, are we high or very high, or are we very low, or are we in this, which is the ideal time to commit? So we are. I think everybody will agree in this room, we're far beyond anywhere on this half of the chart, right? So either we're high or very high, right? And you really do not want to guess where that point is, right? So then Warren Buffett would say it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. So this point, this is really trying to pitch for perfection there, and the cost of that is if you miss it, if you're in the free fall world, then all bets are off. Okay, so 3 points of so we had a perspective on where we are. This is the stock market. All right. So then we look at a few metrics that's closer to the property, to what we're trying to do here as a group. So first this is Bank of England rate. So this directly impact essentially all the interest rates, both in terms of once we have the properties, who do we sell it to? So most people will buy from us, willing to take some form of lending from some financial institutions, which ultimately gets pegged to this rate. Right. So if you look at this, so some people will say actually this is what, 4 years? 4 years of horizon, maybe it's okay. And now the rate is going up. So from that, what conclusion can we draw?
Rates are higher than they have been for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's high as ever. It's not, we know.
Okay, so the rate is going to go up, and it looks like it's going to be materially higher than what it was in the past 4 years' time. Okay, so then from that we can say, okay, so knowing, if we start seeing from that information, so it's actually the cost of both buying finished homes will be higher in the future, and also the cost of building these homes will be higher as well, because development finance is what we use to finance most of the operations, right? So here you say actually, so everything is going to, the cost is going to go up. Now then, if we think about the stock market experience we just had, what if I take a step back from this, look at broader history? So this is broader history. So this is going back to the early 80s. If you look at how rate is moving, right? And if you look at how this little move, people out there will go over, will say so much. They can talk about this bit to the end of the day, right? But actually, you can just see that's a waste of time. That's a waste of life, literally, because that's what you should be looking at. And the conclusion you draw, the difference in conclusion that come from this graph, and this is a 4-year graph. Because to Chris' point, this is actually much better than than the 1 week thing we saw for the FTSE. But this is for 4 years. And the conclusion on this is, so things are going to be expensive, but the conclusion from this is actually, this is a lowest rate environment in living memory. In living memory. Right. So then it's actually, the impact of that is, people are probably borrowing a lot more than they should have, right? Because they're so cheap to borrow. Right? Mortgage costs nothing. And then developers, I think this group, were enjoying probably the lowest development funding cost. Because right now, those institutions which ultimately fund the whole operation of the economy are having this. This is the lowest rate in living memory. Right. So you think about the appraisals or different financing costs we're trying to do now. The benchmark we're actually holding this project against is actually very low if compared to the historical funding cost. So then we look at, okay, so that's the rate. And what about volume? So here we look at mortgage approvals. And this is where you really see the fact where you see, before the crash, you really see very high volume of mortgages being approved. So kind of the ninja type of loans where there's no income, no job, self-certified incomes, and you can see that volume just shots up. And then you have this correction. At this point, bank is not lending anymore, and also people don't really have that much equity to go into a purchase. So now that's gradually recovering. So you may have heard from Alan before. So this is actually the metric Alan constantly monitors at the instinctive level. So the kind of the ease to get mortgages, because essentially that's the demand side of the market of what we're trying to build, and then we need to sell that to the market. So from that, you could say actually, in terms of volume, we're not back in the crazy world yet. So it seems to be recovered, but it's stabilizing. So the criteria of which banks are lending are at this point is probably still reasonable. So here what we need to keep in mind is that the volume seems to be okay, but the price or the cost of that money is extremely low at this point now. So what may be viable today, in the bigger picture of history, we got to ask ourselves: is that still viable? Because to me, property development is a long-term business. You're not in the where's Josh? You're not in the Bitcoin world where over a 2-week period you can make a 10x on your money, and you sort of come out, you go to Barbados. So here, whatever strategy we're forming today, and you guys are becoming good at, that needs to be a strategy that's fit not just for a 2-year period. That's got to be a persistently working strategy. So you got to think about actually if this is your historical average funding cost, then what's the right strategy there? And so this is housing starts. So what this is houses starting into the development process. Right? Because what we see a lot is on Rightmove, you can see housing being finished, put on the market. Right? But the problem with that is, as a lot of you would know by now, you may be looking at a 2-year gap between starts and finish. Right? And in 2 years' time, if you think about that economic cycle, how quickly that job could happen, that's really a lagging indicator. By the time that happens, it's already too late. So you want to think about actually, what about, can I tell certain events before it actually manifests in other parts of the economy? So housing starts traditionally is a very good indicator. So what that shows you is, as housing starts approaches peak, so 2008, and then here. So what happened at these points is essentially, you have bubble conditions. Because the question is, okay, so we're developers here. So if I ask you, okay, what makes you want to build a lot more? Anybody can give me an answer. So what, as a developer, what makes you want to start more and more houses, more and more projects?
Demand.
Yeah, so I can sell a lot more of those. What else?
Cheap money.
Yeah, I can borrow at no cost. So I can sell a lot more money to be made, and I can make these things at lower financing costs. And usually at that point, you have a lot of people jumping in the industry. So you probably have more people to work with as well. So the whole industry just expands. And at that point, you become, and usually at that point, what happens is, because, and this is the beauty about development, that industry, so stock market trading, the money goes in and out very fast. But with development, no matter how smart you are, it takes time to put up buildings. So if you in that cycle, let's say 7-year typical market cycle, 7 years. So you say actually it takes 2 years for if you imagine going back to let's go back to this together. So if you look at this, right, smart money, institutional money, public money, right? If you think about if you assume high level 2-year a pop, so smart money goes in saying right now I'm looking at this market despair. I'm going to buy land at very cheap prices, or I can buy defaulted buildings and convert. So it takes 2 years. So these money comes out. They make a massive killing, and then the institutional guys, so family offices, private equity, say, actually, wait a minute, these guys are doing really well now. I mean, granted, they're only 1 in 10,000, but they're doing really well, and they can see them because this is also big money. So let's do the same. So these guys go in, have another 2-year pop, and then they come out with massive exits. Because what these guys do in margins, these guys do in volume. This is where the big money comes in. And then at that point, all the retail people, so all the kind of the single guy want-to-be developers comes in saying, actually, everybody's making money now. It's a proven strategy, right? So many, I've seen exits, proven strategy. And now I can get cheap funding. Rightmove is shipping out flats and houses like crazy. I can do this myself, right? So now you have the last 2-year run. But the problem is by the time that 2 year finishes, you don't know where you are. If you're there, great. I mean, I know people retired like first half 2007 and retired off stock markets, and they live wherever they want to, right? So that is a possibility. You could finish at this half of the tipping point. The problem is if you finish at that half of the tipping point, you get wiped out. And then you get wiped out, and then these guys come in and say, hey, thank you very much. Now I'm going to get the thing from you at discounts. I'm going to do the 10x axis again. So that just shows, and then if you relate that to housing starts, this is what you see. So as this gradually recovers, so you have the idea of we're selling faster and faster, funding is getting cheaper, more resources devoted into the industry. But then at one point, you actually say, can the market sustain that level of activity over long term? Because trees don't go to the sky. And you sort of say, okay, so the last time I had the correction, 2008. So now I'm 10 years into that correction, more or less stable going up. So, and we said, okay, we're probably high or very high at this point. So it just kind of makes you wonder in terms of housing starts, especially if you're starting a project that take 2 to 3 years to finish, right? So if you're doing something like 6, 12 months, then if you imagine that graph, that economic cycle, you may say, actually, I can respond fast enough. So I'm driving a speedboat. If I see a bump, I can go over it. If you're doing a 3-year-long, like full-blown planning from land build, trying to solve this thing, you're going to wonder, are you driving a speedboat or are we driving the Titanic here? Because if you're driving a Titanic, you can have Howard Marks point 1. You can become aware of where you're in the cycle. So you can see the peak, but you can't do his point 2. You cannot respond anymore. Because this thing, once you commit it, you have senior debt, you may have mass, you have your equity investors to answer to, and you have your own money. And the thing just burning every day. So then what would you do? So I can see a lot of happy faces in the room. This is what I used to tell, I don't know what I'm pointing out as well. Yeah, I guess I need to get used to this. So if everybody still likes me at the end of this, I'm not serving you correctly. Let me put it that way. So Alan is here to show you the upside. I'm here to prevent you from the downside. That's my purpose in life. And it's the same with my family. I told my wife as well. The first thing, most important thing for my kids is resilience. It's to be able to come back. But on that, let me caveat that is, I do believe, compared to funding the upside, it's more important to protect ourselves from the downside. It could take years of capital accumulation, but it could just be like a one-off event, and that could just be wiped out. Especially what we do, if you think about the size of these projects we're looking at, it's not just our own money anymore. Very often we have family money, friends' money, we also have debt money. So to me, this is kind of the most important single factor you got to consider. And also, like, if you're in the industry for the long term, I would say don't worry about the margins. If somebody's been doing property consistently for 10, 15, 20 years, you actually know the person will do okay. The question is, does he have 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 100 million? But either way, he will do very well. And he will have multiple ways to get future incomes if he wants to. So to me, if you worry about survival consistently over a longer term, this fundamentally is working industry. Because I came from a world where you have fintech. Problem with fintech is I can be the best in London today. I can charge my client double the price. 2 weeks later, whether it's somebody from Google or somebody from a garage, you never know. And what's valuable today can become irrelevant in 2 weeks' time. But here, you're not in that business in property. So then we talk about, so this is building houses, and then we say, okay, so money would be required to buy, whether it's to buy houses, to buy consumption. So for that economy to work, you're going to need purchasing power. What this shows you is, so the question is, we're having a recovery now, right? So 10-year recovery. So where does the money come from? Because to have that recovery, people need to spend money to buy things for the economy to grow. So where does that money come from? So if
give them a chance just to have a discussion on their table between them in twos and where does that money come from?
Yes.
Just give them 2 minutes or 3. Just have discussion amongst yourselves as to where does that money come from.
So what are the sources of money being used to spend in the economy so the economy can grow? And it could be any source of funds you could think about. If you have a discussion, we can come back to this. Okay. So what are the sources of money that you came up with that you think is being used to purchase? Yeah, debt. So what kind of debt? Okay. So credit card. Anything else? Mortgage. Anything else?
Equity.
In what format?
Equity.
Equity within the home or within the business? Okay, equity. And that's from a private individual or from a company? Both, okay. Equity. Right. Who else is spending money? So you have private individuals, equity, that could be companies as well. Who else is spending money?
Government.
Government. All right, okay. Okay, so we have private individuals in terms of credit cards, mortgage, and equity, and you can have companies, or you have government. So we're going to have a look at how these guys are doing in the recent years. So this is private sector. So this includes essentially limited companies. So most of you will engage in some form of limited companies in the development business. So if you see historically, so millions, right? So all these numbers are in millions. And just let you know that number at the top, that's 3 trillion. That's with a T there. So you could just see how this is going up. And if you think about housing price, at what period in time did house price increase dramatically? Because if you were here in the history, if you ask people here, are you making money from your homes? Actually, a lot of times, people will say actually no. So historically, prices have been actually fairly stable. It's only in the recent few decades where, we do see in real life where somebody could be making more from his home a year than his personal income, like his full-time job, and just from doing nothing. But then if you think about actually where does that money come from, you see this, and then you can see kind of an attempt at correcting the problem here. So this is the crash. So now you have so Ray Dalio would call this deleveraging. So whereas debt is being reduced because you have to, like you cannot borrow anymore, but very quickly now it's going back up. So financial memory typically is being very short. So usually you look at, and there's kind of one hypothesis people say why we have a market cycle of 8 to 10 years is that's the kind of effective financial memory. As in every 10 years, the people who are making these decisions, as in bank managers, will get a new batch. So they're either being promoted or they've been let go. So every 8 years or 10 years, people forget. So now that's going back up. So we're borrowing. I mean, historically, you can just see how much more we're borrowing. This is lending to the private sector. Right, so that would be companies. So now we look at
Is that adjusted for anything, or is that just?
that's nominal.
Nominal.
Yeah.
That's just nominal.
Yeah. I wouldn't worry too much about whether it's real or nominal, given how steep this is. So Warren Buffett would say, and this is true especially true in your appraisals, right? So Warren Buffett would say, if you need to carry your calculations to 2 decimal places, you are in the wrong deal. Just stop looking, right? So, and it's the same case here. So you can see how much. And by the way, once you get the source, you're going to see. If you read, so this is from Bank of England. If you read the raw data, they're going to make a lot of kind of caveat description, it'll be paragraphs of how it is created. But actually, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't really matter because the concept here is whether it's what 2.7 trillion or 2.5 trillion, we don't care. But this should mean something to us, just in terms of where that increase in value in property is coming from. So that's private sector. So this is private debt. So this is individual debt. This is our debt, mortgage, credit card, which you all correctly mentioned. And you can, very similar picture. So historically, you're there, and you can see this is the, so I studied economics in Cambridge. When I studied, the lecturer was getting very concerned because she said, actually, we were teaching students all these theories about business cycles. But between 2000, 2008, like 2007, we had no business cycles. It was called the Great Moderation. So economies went up like straight line. Everybody was happy. So this is a new paradigm. So this time it's different. So we figured it out. We can manage the economy now. But actually, if you look at private debt, so you're sort of wondering, is that growth really growth in productivity, in technology, in education? Or is that just growth because people are borrowing more, so they're spending more? So this is private money. And you could see, and this is the part that kind of alarms me a little bit. Post-crash, if you see companies, at least they're trying, that's a 10, 20% correction. There's some kind of move towards deleveraging and to reduce the debt burden. But private money is pretty much flat. And I mean, to some extent, UK government, which we're going to go to later on, we have the same problem. It's like sometimes you know that debt is a problem, but you can't do anything about it. Because it's like, okay, so this is individuals. So it's easy for them to ramp up debt. And as long as the bank is willing to borrow, to lend, to take the risk, you can just get money from the bank. But to pay it back, you have to do what? Higher income or reduce the expense. Right? So both are very painful for most people. So then it's kind of like, okay, so but if you can only go up, not go down, then over time you're going to dig the hole more and more, because every time you need money, you borrow, but you can't really pay it back later on. And so this is private debt and how this is progressing. Right? So this is public debt. So this is government money. So in theory, this is kind of one of the most richest individuals that can afford to buy us out of any problems. And you could see, this is 2008. This is the great bailout. And what's interesting is it doesn't really reduce. Right? This is still going up. This is kind of the Titanic in the greatest sense. So a lot of times, I was amazed because I was in management consulting at one point. So you can go in and advise these CEOs. So if you want to buy that company, you got to know who owns that company. And then we were looking at banks. It's like, like Bank A owns Bank B, and then Bank B owns Bank C. But actually, who owns Bank A? Right. The government of United Kingdom. And you see, and then you see the government of United States. And you just see this happens.
So that has an impact on the quantity of money injected into the economy?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
yeah.
why the pound is dropping a little bit as well?
Exchange rate, that has more to do with how different countries interact with each other. Okay. Because exchange rate is all relative. Whereas this is looking at pure sense of, let's say, the UK government, where are they spending their money? And more importantly, where could they spend their money if they want to? So that just tells us where we are today. So that's government money, shoots up, and if you look at this is going back to the 70s. This is historical highs by what? Double the amount. So before it's here, now it's here.
So when is that money owed to then? That's go to the government or by the government to the international funds or to the banks, or is that who actually owns the money?
Yeah.
Where does the debt come from?
That's a good question. So where the money came from, right? Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually the bit that's missing from this list, which is the next slide. So this is central bank. Because so to your point, right, it's like, where does money ultimately come from? It's just like numbers on screens, right? Before we used to have like notes and coins, but now those don't exist anymore. It's just a number. So who's behind that number? Who can create more or less of these? It's these guys, central banks. And this is central bank's balance sheet. So before the crisis, this is so that's millions, right? So that would be 600 billion. And then the central bank essentially doesn't own much. They have their own operations, they have to finance, but beyond that, it's very minimal. And then the crisis hit. So now they start to essentially, you may hear the term quantitative easing. Essentially, kind of central banks trying to create money. and that just been going up ever since. So it's kind of once you open the tab, it's like you can't close it. So because then people say actually you can't stop. If you stop, the economy will go down again, right? And no central banker would ever want to have their name on why this thing crashed. So government. So that's government debt, and this is central bank, and essentially they work kind of. So in the UK, they work very closely. The Bank of England works very closely with Treasury. So essentially, kind of one is in theory they're supposed to be separated, but in reality that's not the case. So if Treasury needs money, they will come to Bank of England, and that you may have heard the term Treasury gilts or Treasury bonds. Essentially, that's the means where they exchange. Central government gave the central bank a piece of paper. Central bank gave government $1 billion. Now the government has $1 billion. Now the bank use that $1 billion to do things, schools, roads, and NHS actually in today's case. So so that's central bank, government, private.
Sorry, just to labour that point a little bit more. So the banks give this bit of paper across to government. Here's £1 billion. Do they just make it up? Oh, that's right, it's $1 billion on a bit of paper. It doesn't actually come from anywhere else at all.
That's the well. So if you speak to an economist, they will tell you sort of this open market operation. So they give you the whole kind of analogy of it, but essentially at the fundamental level, digital money can be created out of thin air, and it's slightly different because the reason why that could be done is so what okay. So let's say Ian and I. So I'm the central bank, and then Ian is any company. It's like HSBC. So HSBC says, okay, I'm experiencing a crisis, so I'm going to be the next Northern Rock. I need some money from you. So central bank actually can do two things. One is I can somehow give him $1 billion, which is actually slightly difficult because here it's like, are you subsidizing your business or how? Because you're giving money to a commercial company. How does that work? However, I can buy something from him, right? He can give me, what he thinks are like junk. So people who are going to go in default or any kind of, or Barclays stock certificate. So he can give me anything. And these things, if he sells to the market, maybe worth 10. But he sells to me, I can give him 100. But that's a trade, right? So I'm not giving him free money. It's not a subsidy, it's a trade. And as long as, from my bank perspective, as long as we agree, in a future date, Ian will buy that back from me. Because this stuff is junk, right? So I know it's not worth 100, but as long as you gave me security, and then you promise to buy it back at a higher price, so it becomes a slightly different kind of transaction. It becomes a trade instead of just printing money and just dish it out. But in reality, it's no difference, right? Because all you see is now Ian suddenly, from holding a bunch of junk worth 10, now somebody's giving him 100 of cash.
Does it also work with how we talk about international? So, like, you hear a lot that China or America owes a lot of money to China, or the UK, there's a lot of money, Chinese money that's funding debt or whatnot. How does that play into this as well?
Yeah. So foreign exchange market, it's so slightly different there because and we're drifting a little bit. So we just try to finish that conversation quickly. How that would work is with any trade. So we tend to think about if I sell you something, you give me cash, I give you the product, right? But actually, planet as a whole, international trade don't work quite the same way, because if you give me money, I give you a product. Where does your money come from? It could be a foreign investor who's investing in your business. So that money is got to come from somewhere. So globally, as a system, you sort of think actually money inflow and outflow. So whenever you have a trade deficit, people would say, like UK case, you're gonna have the reverse. You're gonna have a capital surplus. So that money actually ultimately all come from somewhere. Even if it's debt, it will still needs to be an inflow and outflow. And then essentially, let's say in the China case, China could be saying actually to buy from me you need my currency because you're paying my local suppliers, right? But then at the same time I can lend you that currency. So then essentially it's almost like equity in property investment. You're kind of delaying that cash flow. But we are, sort of top line message here I would say is for this sort of market, especially for property, international element, depending on the type of property, but for what we look at, I would say you probably don't have to concern yourself too much with exchange rates and international trade, those kind of additional factors. If you're doing, let's say, prime London, that's definitely the thing to look at. So Mayfair, 10 million a pop, that you care about exchange rates. And on that, by the way, right now, entire UK is on sale because the exchange rates, the value of the currency is so low, which is actually a good thing for us. So, but in terms of what we do, we should be more concerned about domestic demand, about raw purchasing power of the economy, which shouldn't come from central bank, or the government, or the private individuals, or the companies. So then so that's where we are today. Now, if you think about the second point, so that's Hallmark's point one. So know where we are in the cycle. So we roughly know, and whether the stock market, all the economy, all the house building. So we roughly, like everywhere we look, it kind of gives us a roughly consistent message. So we're either high or very high at this point. And then you sort of say, okay, so what if something happens? So let's say we had the next crash. So let's say 2008 all over again in a slightly different form. Then how can we come out of it? So then, okay, how did we come out of the last one? So the last one, we came out by borrowing money, and this, so private money, this could not be borrowed. So this private debt could not increase during crisis because nobody will be willing to lend and nobody will have the income to borrow. Right? So that couldn't move. Government money and central bank money. Right? So this is what we did last time. But if you take yourself out and look at history, so this is going back to the 70s. So that's what happened in the last crash. Do we think we can do the same again in the next crash? If you look at where we started and where we are now, doubling of that position. Right? Private, can't count on it. Great on the up, but it can do nothing in terms of correction because you already maxed out. Company lending, can we borrow? So this is also going down during the crash. Again, no one will lend. So that's something you can't count on. But what about, so that's spending, right? And then the different side of this would be, this, interest rates. So every time you have a crash, what you can do is you can make the money cheaper, so people are more willing to borrow, to spend. But right now, that's where we are in terms of interest rates. So last time we had a bit of a 5% wiggle room. We came down right to the floor, being flat since, 2008, 2009. So the next time, where do you want to go? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is the bit that, personally, from my background, this is the part that alarms me the most. It's not really the fact that we're 10 years into the recovery and we're overdue for a crash, because personally, I think we should all be happy when there's a crash, because that's the time where you start to build your real wealth. But then the problem is really like, how do you see so once the patient gets ill, how do you see what's the recovery, what's the treatment? So we can't, so central bank, traditionally, this is the central bank's job, to manage rates. And this only supposed to be the solution on how we manage economies. So when I was in Cambridge, this is what they teach you. And they said, do not ever print money. Look at Zimbabwe. So they had hundreds of percent of inflation. So it takes more piece of paper to buy the piece of paper. But then crash happened, that thing hit zero. Let's do quantitative easing. It's not printing money, God knows why, but it's quantitative easing, right? It sounds like a great name, but it's printing money. And you see how, right? You see in central bank, right? From that to there. What else do you call that? So we are out of, so we can't adjust interest rates. I mean, this in theory, because it's kind of all done in a digital and kind of superficial way. I mean, there's no real theoretical limit for this stuff. But you got to have a common sense. At one point, other people are going to look at us saying, actually, I do not know whether what you're doing is still credible or not. And then the government is also at that point. So that's the bit that I always wondered about. And to me, what the upside of this, and there's always upside. The upside of this is when that happens, if these entities who used to borrow and then spend to bring us out of the recovery, if they can't do the same next time, and the rates can't really go down, then that moment, whoever has cash will be able to create extraordinary value out of that cash. And that could really be, well, you got to have the experience as well. So I think it's Warren Buffett. So you say, so a person with money meets a person with experience. The person with experience will walk away with the money, and the person who had money will not have experience. So at that point, as long as you have experience, or you are able to partner with people who have experience, and you have cash, then that's actually the moment you can create extraordinary value from that opportunity. Okay. So next session, I'm going to go into something more property specific. But before that, any questions that we've done so far? It's a lot of graphs.
I'm just kind of curious where the liquid cash seems to be, because obviously you've got large corporations that have good balance sheets with lots of cash coming in, like your Facebooks, your Apples, and you've got a big offshore system where people tend to move their money
Yep.
to hide it. Is there actually that much liquid capital, or does it just seem to be debt, no matter which country you go to? Or
All right, that's a great question. So I'm going to come to that with the example. So this guy, around 2005-6, so he's because he's in risk, so he would call himself a defensive investor. So he actually became very defensive in 2004 and 5. And at that point, he said, okay, so I sense something is not right here. I'm going to raise liquidity, cash. I'm going to raise a distress fund. So the idea is once the thing hits, I'm going to have money and experience to profit from that. So then where do I get the money from? So family offices, hedge funds, and all these different places. I think he planned to raise something like a 5 billion. It's like a low single-digit number. He got 11 billion. And that just shows, at least shows me, this thing does exist. We are, as a collective, we're probably somewhere in this group, I would say. As long as as much as I would kind of try to please my ego and think I'm really smart and all that, but actually we can probably try to be the first half of this crowd, but this is where we are. So here you have private equity funds, institutions, hedge funds, and this is only the few. So the likes of Howard Marks and Warren Buffett. So they are able to do this. So what he did, so he raised 11 billion, and then very quickly, here you're going to look at multiples of the returns. So that money does exist, and people will have a way to source that money, but that money will always be a very small pool compared to, let's say, these guys, especially these guys. Yeah, because it takes a lot of patience. Right? So Charlie Munger would say, So from his view, so this is Warren Buffett's business partner. So they would say actually the money is not made in the buying or selling; it's made in the waiting. But it takes a lot to wait. So Warren Buffett would say, if I want to shoot fast-moving elephants, as in companies who have very small window of selling and who are great companies, I need to carry a loaded gun. So he would regularly have tens or hundreds of billions just cash. And people say, actually, you're burning so much money every single minute because you have so much money that's not being deployed. But he would actually say, no, because when Lehman Brothers was going through bankruptcy, they called Warren Buffett. Because they knew in the whole wide world, probably only 3 people could prevent that situation from happening. So that just shows you, so that liquidity is there, but it's very rare, and it takes a great amount of character and knowledge to be able to sit through that. Because the problem you're always going to have is the moment greed starts kicking and envy, which is the big thing. So if you see you're not doing so I believe right now. So let's say I'm sitting in cash. I'm going to wait for that, and I think the market is in a really high place right now. But next door neighbor doing developments, going to stocks, just making money, and like our wives go out together to have dinner, like mine feels really inferior, and he's just getting a new car now, he's doing a house extension at the back. So stuff like this really kicks in. And at that point, so that's why they would say that the money is made in the waiting. And Warren Buffett would say, for him, investing is no straight game. So I think you don't have to swing the bat every time. You wait for 5, 10 years, you see the thing you like, you really swing it. Okay, so now I will go through just come back to forecasting. So let's say we're in the property business. So a lot of our valuations are done by Savills. And we read a lot of materials from them as well. So this is from Savills. So this is yesterday. So they try to do an annual price prediction into the future. And just come back to our starting point about forecasters. So let's just do a demonstrated example. So it kind of you get it from a property perspective. So this is Savills' prediction this year. A few observations. First is, you see how it really tries to break open the UK market, so there's by different regions. And then so if you see London, right on the bottom, and then for London, they're predicting, it's dropping off the screen here. So essentially they're predicting -2% this year, so in 2009, so -2% next year, and then 0%, and then it's like 1.5. So over a 5-year period, they predict 4.5% of growth in London. Right, and then you sort of think, and this is like the stock market problem we had, right? So 5 days of FTSE 100, what conclusion can you draw from this? You sort of say, okay, I'm in London, I got 2 flats, all right, I should be careful, right? So this may be what's going to happen. And then these guys know that they run so many, so they see the market very well. But then you say, okay, so how do I know if that's really the case or not? Actually, it turns out a very easy way to validate that is if you go back to the past, what did they predict in the past? So stop looking forward, stop trying to make a decision on whether this thing is right or wrong. Stop looking at all the reports that are trying to validate this or invalidate this, but just go back in the past. So if you go to 2015, first observation is, you see how now is central London, outer London, suburban, inner commute, outer commute, and then it's like the rest of the country. Right? Whereas, this year, London is there, and then you have like this whole southern UK has become a lot of different regions now. And so that's very interesting how they're shifting the focus and how they're looking at the country. But so this is 3 years ago. So central London, 2008, 5%. Outer London, 2008, 4%. And then the 2009 is 6.5 and 4%, and then 6.5. So 5 year, they forecasted for London, it's about 20% increase. All right, so this is 3 years ago. So they went from essentially 20 to now 4.5. Right? If you say, okay, so what does that tell me? So what if I go back even more? So 2013, right? So now, 2018, this is the end of their 5-year forecast now. So we're looking at what they saw 5 years back of today. Right? And then you can see, okay, what did they think? London, okay, so 2006, 8%. Last year should be 6.5, now it's 5. Again, so that's a 23% increase over 5 years' time. So for me, if I look at that, I sort of think, how much value do I want to place on these numbers? And then you see, the thing is, it's okay to be wrong most of the time. As long as you're not wrong, the few of times it matters. Because you could be wrong about this in 2000, let's say, 10, 11, it'd be okay, because you'll still be very early in that cycle. But today, if we believe as a group we're high or very high, that 5-year forecast, if that's off, that could be really off. So then this is where I kind of wonder, if we go back to this, how many of these 5-year forecasts do we, right? So that was a 5-year forecast of 20%, and we probably had that, or maybe have even more than that. But how many of those 5-year growth of 20% you're going to have within one cycle before this really tips down? And then also it's like, if this is the source of information we use, we'll be in big problems, because these guys, they sell properties. Right? So what are they going to tell you? Buy now, because it's going to be worth a lot more tomorrow. Build more, because it's going to worth a lot more tomorrow. So they do more transactions in between. So you kind of, it's like, you're going to a barber shop saying, do I need a haircut or not? It's like, what are they going to tell you? Okay. So I'll finish on this slide. I have some appendix slides as well, which I think, judging by the expressions, I don't have time for. But I want to finish on this. So this is the... Yeah. Do we have question times? All right. Okay.
You can have question time after lunch.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, John.